compression 15, this is a representative of a class of agents, bispecifics. Sorely heard a lot about them during ESMO. This is a PD-1 CTLA-4 bispecific. AstraZeneca also has a PD-1 CTLA-4 bispecific. And so this was, again, compared against chemotherapy alone, not chemotherapy plus immunotherapy, but as the rationale we heard before at the time of design, this was reasonable design. So chemotherapy versus chemotherapy plus cananilumab. We've seen this data previously published in Nature Medicine a while ago. Now we saw the mature results really confirming what we already had seen, but it is certainly nice to show that with additional follow-up, the surviving benefit has been maintained from the original publication. So that it's hard not to do cross-trial comparisons, although we're told not to, but if you stack... If you stack up that absolute numbers and the medians, it's comparable to what we achieved with chemo plus PD-1. But if you have the curves, I don't know if we have the actual curves, but one thing that is interesting and is seen with some other CTLA-4, and I'm quite interested to see if it holds out of PD-1 TIGIT, for example, is you do see a plateau and slightly higher proportion than what you see with chemo-nivo if you were to superimpose the curves. So there may be a subset of population that is a little bit greater percent of the overall that do have these long benefits with a PD-1 CTLA-4 bispecifics. I think that is a subset of patients that would be great to understand, because there may be a group of patients who actually do have greater benefit with the addition of CTLA-4 plus PD-1 blockade on top of chemo. And I think, Yelena in 649, even if you look at the Ipi-Nivo arm and then MSI versus the Nivo containing arm, you kind of see the same limb.
I mean, with even from checkpoint 32, which was the Nivo A-line study where we picked the Ipi high dose to go forward in the base 3, if you respond to big duration responses double to Bopis cap had septic response, and also the patients that there are 2 patients, cultured patients from the initial checkpoint area 2 areas, cures despair. That is that happens. So I think having a feasible and well-tolerated CTLA-4 partner, that's just cares this must be very true. And when skin China and the whole
But getting that what would do better. Don't banal not and say but or the near amount.
I think people people often ask patients and mother cancer, the specialist, whenever we cure cancer, is asked cancer. And I think it will take all of these options in sequence or do different mission career position of different therapies. So in the future, I think so we know, for example, from check data, when biomarker data, we'll sort of see what first check our bio response, but maybe now they get right, so we get T-Rex, which over. Ideally in the future, will the body crystallize day score up feasible way to select mission. So for some patients, it will be anti-PD-1 alone. Some cases, it will be potential combination checkpoint inhibitor combination to the checkpoint plus anti-tumor target. So it's an exciting time to get into gastroesophageal cancer. We're planning on retiring, so we're not going to be working like some some people at ESMO into the 70s. So there'll be room for you all to grow and develop the field. So Amalia, what's next? PG, NGX, yeah. But these are as okay. Well, what do you want to talk as a chart here and then now with as in home? What else should we cover? Should we talk about FGFR-2b?
Of course, yes.
So we can tell that you will discuss the data. Okay. So on Monday in the presidential session, we will see for the first time a randomized clinical trial on FGFR to be targeting with marituximab and chemotherapy versus chemotherapy alone. So this is the 42-101 study. Of course, we can anticipate the results because the results will be discussed tomorrow. But this is coming from a very precise story starting from phase 2 randomized trial and the biomarker selection of the cutoff for positivity, designing phase 3 trial as 42-101, 42-102. So, of course, we read the different press releases, you also paper data. So I wanted just to have your thoughts, even if we can disclose the results. But of course, we will be all there to listen to your discussion because I think it will be amazing. But yeah, what do you think about the future development of FGFR targeting?
For spot-grade background, you need more biomarkers. You heard about HER2 a bit, and that's an exciting biomarker where, because of that biomarker, more and more developing is happening in gastroesophageal cancer. We have, of course, PD-L1, Claudin, or expression of very party, and MSI. Those are the first core sort of important steps to understand whether the tumor is one with her, but it's still development. And FGFR2b overexpression, but also FGFR receptor activation, can happen in gastroesophageal. So the Fortitude study looked at bemarituzumab, which is a antibody that targets FGFR2b in combination for first step. You know that not every antibody is created the same. Some antibodies have synergistic activities that others don't. Or just map in selected patient population using patient pushback as single agent active. So that's the BTs. And we had exciting data. I think, Sam, did you participate in the fights?
Not in fighting, but for
Fortitude, yeah. So Sam has also on the steering committee. So, but the fight study where we saw those kappa markers has a ratio of 0.5, which is not receivable of whole flux. Using the higher FGFR cutoff of 10% and IC2 plus, it was a very hard news start for this population of patients that otherwise going on or bought in pioneer truth. So tomorrow, it's supposed to be decided presentation by Dr. Ra, presidentials late the evening on the last day of ESMO, but I would stick around and Sam, maybe, someone in sort of honor Gageta and comment on the cheats to see.
Yeah, for sure. First, I'll make a comment on biomarkers since I know there's some trainees in there. You should read everything that this guy, Dan Hayes, writes. He was a breast cancer oncologist at the University of Michigan, but he wrote a paper in JCO like 10 years ago about what does it take to get the biomarker good enough, and I think this will be relevant to the FGFR2b story, which is why I'll mention it, but there's two essential components. One is analytic validity, and it be reproduced reliably and at a cutoff, and I am not sure that is true of FGFR2b because the antibody has been rather proprietary, so there's not a lot of comparisons out there, although there is getting to be more and more publication. And then the second is it clinically, does it have a clinical utility, which is, did the patient do better because you used the biomarker to select? And those are two fundamental properties for any biomarker. And again, FGFR2b at the current cutoff probably includes all of the patients that benefit, but may also include some population that don't benefit. And so there's probably some refinement to thinking about how to select these patients beyond what was done, although what was done makes a lot of sense based on the bite data. The toxicity is another issue. I mean, certainly implementing new drugs, and we've learned this with Claudin drugs as well. Any drug that has a class-specific toxicity is going to be a learning curve. In cholangiocarcinomas, where they have FGFR2 fusion and TKIs, learned a lot about phosphorin diets and these nail changes and stuff that have gotten better. FGFR2V inhibition, as we learned over the years, is associated with several different corneal toxicities. And these patients require baseline and relatively thorough ophthalmologic exams, which is not always the easiest thing to do. The good news is that the toxicity when you hold the drug does appear to be reversible within about 8 weeks-ish, seemingly from what's out there publicly. But the ophthalmologic findings can persist for quite a long time. And so treating to ocular toxicity or seeing some of these things is definitely a new thing we'll have to learn how to do. If this half a way ultimately becomes something that's approved, I think we'll all wait to see the data of this phase 3 to think about what the path forward is. But ocular toxicity is a real thing, and it can be bothersome for patients, just like nausea can be bothersome for patients with clotting drugs. So definitely some experience that we'll all have to gain.
Yeah, and definitely with the new drugs, the problem of there are toxicity is improving. For example, with the novel ADC, I don't remember the name, and BGB something. But anyway, with his agent, it was demonstrated at least a clinical level. There was a poster at the ACR that actually based on the mechanism of action, even though this is an AEC and not just a non-covalent antibody, the ocular toxicity issue is definitely lower, is not an issue. So the drugs are improving. And also I take that 4211 is the first piece of the puzzle, because we would have to wait for the results of the larger study, 42102, this more contemporary study, because the control arm is actually chemo and larger sample size. So we would have to put everything together, but I think that FGFR-B is an important target. We would have to work on this. There is a group of researchers, including you, working on the heterogeneity, special heterogeneity of these markers, and also Koishitara in Japanese work around on the overlap of these 5 markers. And it really seems that there is no people overlap, at least as far as I know, HGFR2B and other markers in the many including coding type 2.
Yeah, that's always worked primarily. Yes, if you use the cutoffs that have been published, there does not appear to be specific enrichment among other biomarker groups. It's a little bit like Claudin in that way, where it's sort of, there is, kind of runs through the other groups at a relatively stable prevalence, but outside of MSI, where we really don't see as much Claudin or as much FGFR2, kind of runs through some of the other groups.
Yeah, and we should remember that sometimes it's also analytical problem, because if the tissue is taken, for example, 3 or 4 years before, so there is antigen loss, and so you can get negative results or lower expression or popular expression, but at the end of the day, if you are going for a new biopsy, probably on the metastatic sites, you're going to get these partial results and positive results and making the patient eligible for the treatment. So nowadays, the trials are really putting some restrictions in the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And for example, the tissue must be taken a maximum of 2 years before the enrollment. And this is annoying, because otherwise we may face the same problem: heterogeneity, loss of expression, temporal heterogeneity. So is this something we should take into account?
And I think also Brigitte, think GFR2 is important.
But for me, the one thing that does see me a little bit of pause about because ocular toxicity is not something that we as medical oncologists are good at recognizing or following. So I was not a per one study, I was per one. So, and so probably below first thing lesions per the dry eyes, and then that's followed by over time heterogeneous. But I don't know how good you guys are at slide down exams. I had no clue what I'm doing. So me that they have to put ophthalmology as time class. And so to me, the one thing that was difficult in CATA, right? People say, Anna, it's easy for you at Princess Margaret. You can call your ophthalmologist, they're going to see a patient, to mark. And you would have Corneal. But what are we going to do? Unity.
Yeah, so it's definitely a real problem. I mean, we in Boston, we're physically next to the Mass Eye and Ear, and we can send people, but most of our patients come from New Hampshire and they're not even ophthalmologists. So I just ask patients how they bigger than building on right buoy, yes.
Yeah. All right. Any questions with the audience? Please.
Yes, Annie, there are good results. I'm a practicing oncologist in the USA, so the community oncology, including a large number of. I'm sourced from the United States, so I have a community oncologist and a pretty large number of GI. The question, is a little bit unrelated, but I wanted to ask your opinion about the capecitabine plus cirrhosis maintenance plateau. That was an ASCO risk before, after a basic induction for SR disease, and particularly if you could maybe mention few applications in signal cell morphology of the cancer. I see that quite a bit. Thank you.
Well, Phil, as Armani study, I think, is the most relevant study to quote in this. Please tell us about Bill Agrakis is in the one, and of course the study is held very appropriate there. Armani, this is an investigative initiated study, very innovative design. So please tell us.
Yeah, basically, before we had the opportunity to use monoclonal antibodies, and except for trastuzumab, so before the immune checkpoint inhibitors, maintenance therapy was probably more than the area gastric cancer. But coming from colorectal cancer research, of course, we designed this trial for the money, not just because we are a fan of fashion designers, but maybe yes. Could I say? Maybe that was the reason, but the aim was really to allow the exposure to all active agents in the therapeutic group of these patients, because we know that when we gave platinum platinum-based chemotherapy to these patients, actually secondary resistance to chemotherapy is really quick. And so even in clinical trials, 40 to 50% of patients were able to receive actually secondary therapy. And in the clinical practice, probably the percentage of these patients was even lower. So the design was easy. Basically, patients with disease control after 3 months of oxaliplatin-based chemo were randomized to either continuation versus early switch to cellular demonstrative second-line regimen, paclitaxel and SIOPA. And this provided a significant benefit in types of progression-free survival, which was partly spiked, but also the key secondary effect of overall survival. And now there is a proposal for the design of the Armani 2 study. I cannot really disclose the agents used in this trial, but you will find it in clinical trials that's called Infused. Well, okay, I think I can tell you that people with oxaliplatin-based chemo plus tislelizumab continuation versus the switch to paclitaxel and ramucirumab tislelizumab. So this is a contemporary study with the use of immunotherapy. Of course, in the clinical practice, we do continuation maintenance because we continue immunotherapy until disease progression or for a total duration of 2 years. It depends on the response, tolerance, etc. And sometimes we can also continue the fluoride backbone. So, for example, here there was a poster looking at the potential continuation of the fluoride component, capecitabine, after receiving double chemotherapy plus tislelizumab, and actually patients receiving capecitabine and tislelizumab had the best outcomes. We really don't know because actually the benefit of adding tislelizumab was observed irrespective of capecitabine continuation or not, because of course the magnitude of benefit is given by immunotherapy and not by the chemotherapy continuation. But anyway, continuing chemotherapy may be useful for some patients with good tolerance to the fluoropyrimidine backbone, and also maybe an option for these patients to prolong the duration of disease control. Anyway, we should really discuss with our patients on what to do after the induction phase, because of course we have to discuss the potential toxicities, the pros and cons, and the expectations, the number of hospital visits, and how they are really willing to continue chemotherapy, or some of them may just go for maintenance with IO alone, and this is really good. Maybe the DDR1 value is high, and so they are really satisfied with IO continuation alone. So it's really a discussion, and it's not just black and white, because sometimes we can continue capecitabine plus IO for some months, and then de-escalate to IO alone. There is no single rule, so we should always remember to discuss with the patient, share with them which is the optimal decision, and it's not just in a single time point, because we see the patient several times, so we can discuss how to really modulate the maintenance. Nowadays we have continuation maintenance, but for example, trastuzumab, pembrolizumab, what do you do? Do you give based on the 811, let's say, do you give just the combination of the human and non-human antibodies, or do you give a fluoride?
Yeah, I think fluoride are some more disease in our patients, how are unique, because they're just, they always want to continue patients every few years. Now I'm onto this. Back, I think an escalation strategy would be very best. In fact, we followed them very carefully with either the patient with like disease, but gastroscopies, trying to catch the disease before it progresses. Clinically meet or regression, such as ascites, and it does take a path issues all give like sure continuum therapy, but so this disease progression and now to escalate, right? So I think those patients are relatively fit and want to have such these fresh image oral capecitabine and every 6 weeks therapy or every 4 weeks therapy.
So when do you stop? Let's say you have a fellow patient 5 years on Herceptin, Pembro, K, and no other disease, and now they want to stop. You're right, but obviously also the education, because after kind of US stop after 2 years, biologtor and me eyes.
No, well that's for sure. I mean, in clinical trials, absolutely we stop after 2 years. Unless it's MSI tumor, you don't have this out. And MSI cancers, often it takes longer to convince someone to stop. Then then to continue. But we do this in therapy. For HER2-positive disease, I had patients on the initial phase 2, and there's still 1 or 2 patients on. It's just very difficult to continue. And again, our patient populations, they are highly metastatic and scared. And when they come in with complete response, they vividly remember, even it was 5 years ago, what Dan can tell right, it really right, and then speaks. So, and we don't typically stop, and that's why I think maintenance strategy or really definitive biomarker to try to de-escalate. cDNA is okay, not great. Imaging obvious is okay, not perfect. And the metastatic disease, we just don't have a way.
Sure.
What else? Please go ahead.
I have price spreads out plus days.
What are speaking of ice? Or yes, water pools.
So, tell us.
I'm Amalia. I'm precious operations behind this operation.
Trying to be a oncologist in Armenia and a dual in GI in Sapomas. And my question to you is more like just your thoughts and understand it. What are you most waiting for? How do you see gastric cancer predominantly in like 5 years? What do you see will be the next updates and improvements? With so many biomarkers and new drugs approval, we don't know how to sequence them. With ladies on the OSMA, like no one knows or how to start, how to go.
So the next 5 years will be really moving, meaning our treatments up there and breakthroughs the perioperative setting. And as Sam really talked, focus on country fluids carried purchase. I think treatment de-escalation, as appealing as it used to be, we're not trying to for that yet, and a lot of it is escalation and focusing on the systemic disease nature of this cancer. We know that most patients they occur for metastatic or localized disease. It's always systemic disease where we bowels host right for metastatic patients at below hand patients. So focusing on perioperative setting and pushing that envelope is what many of us are excited about and collaborated together to answer the questions quicker. I think the next phase will be using the digital pathology and machine learning to try to expedite biomarker testing. So not having to wait for, even if it's just 8 different and goes to biomarkers, doing first and what these results will scan it each week so that we won't have to wait for our shit to shoot. And then we just do work at Oncology. That's probably higher, you may be longer. And what I'm particularly hoping for is to try to tackle chemotherapy refractory subset patients, or I was using theranostic patients or other forms of systemic chemotherapy for. So radiation, unfortunately, is always unpreferred, non-prescribed. These are other ways target some of these biomarker. So the population using more dreams now. Then the patient comes in, and we accept the fact that some patients may not want to have their esophagus or stomach out, and that's okay. We understand that they need to be really all in for watchability, because that's a pretty involved process as well. You need to be able to come in every 3 months, get a PET scan, and that's the keto. And I've done this now on several patients, even before the Flagella study. Usually it's patients who they can be octogenarians in their 80s and really don't want to press the operation pre-medically in okay shape. And I wouldn't rush to radiation either. We usually start on either a doublet with anti-PD-1, Botox type regimen, or if they're efficacious, even will those who do spot was IO. We repeat, we would get to the maximum part response in the rekin and last. And you'd be surprised in some patients you'll see a clinical response, complete response to rekin and last being vibes negative. So in that case, I don't see a compelling reason to radiate, because what do we palate in there? The only reason we could see radiation, it was residual disease, no evidence that by what metastasis, G-grade control, so forth. This is a rare population of patients, but it does occur. I mean, we know that even in Turkey's Corneal and V11, Linap studies, so forth, Ashnan studies, there are populations with adeno or have PG response. outside an MSI, outside a KO1 like ED. And so that's it was that in stage journey is their journey. I actually don't disagree with them that with advanced gastroesophageal cancer, the rate of recurrence historically with them so high that rush into surgery and perhaps given chance of the disease to declare itself, right? So during 6 months or 8 months of that immunotherapy is feasible option. Other question? Go ahead.
Thank you for the nice session. Boris, congratulations around Casserole. I want to ask you in the stage.
I mean, I know we are.
Yeah, I'm in this issue from the same mosquito colleagues. I want to ask you that in the patients who we achieved pathological complete response, should we continue in advanced dual or promediate the isolation?
So the question is, have a Y8T0N0 tumor after flood durba. What to do in adjuvant setting. So the standard right now, I think outside of strawberry and subgroup analysis and so forth, the standard is to continue therapy. There's some retrospective data that suggests that the non-responders for patients with complete response and maybe less benefit, but you have to remember this is not only a power subgroup analysis and it's not respected. And the way that I practically think about it is that the impact of micrometastasis versus the primary tumor, maybe two separate vascular disease. So again, my decision was not based on pathologic response, although that's helpful to the patient. Sure, it's based on the patient most like you look at therapeutic to about 12% the body weight had been lost total, and then back to eating normally or their version of normal, or is the extent that ability is small or these so forth, and the time after into the outbreak period. So typically we see it out 4 or 5 weeks post-op. We see how they're doing, and then maybe typically they're not quite yet ready, but they're yet ready. We kind of do put talk about what to do, how to get better at certain days, and then they may match a week or 2 weeks period of zero therapy. And again, it's more of a clinical decision of whether or not additional systemic therapy is given. I don't think we're quite there yet. Even with tools as to see the DNA and so forth, sensitivity of those tools is not quite sufficient for us to go out. But there, when the patients, clinical and biopsies are high risk outdoors. What is so I'll turn the question to you, Amanda, and then also the group as perhaps international community of oncologists practicing outside of your gastroesophageal cancer and so forth. What did you find most surprising or recited it last all? Good size on the tongue.
The size the poor still have to listen to your presentation. You do have session tomorrow, so but until now, sir.
It's very similar, but there you see by different. So sometimes they know only racing. They have some other bispecifics and populations coming to the early trials. And now, a few years ago when I went to my first pathway, 4 years ago, he was on a Y-sex.
Was already had a bios. Oh, this mobilized spices or what. And now going in here, we see a lot of them going on phase 2 and phase 3, but it takes time. And before it gets to the approval, it will take even more time. So how do you think we should design the trial so the approvals are earlier when there is good luck there? Do you think that it matters you designed a bit much around and all the experts, and we're just started and we're just watching what you do. But this actually takes how good the results can be and how interpreted will be, how you choose.
Well, so we had the ICE representation of Sam, who is on that to Sandra guys. Oh, now this group, right, over from Canada and the group goes in Italy and the UMA. So I would, before we start with that, I would say what I find more frustrating as a researcher is not that the lack of approvals, but a lack, even when the drug is approved, the lack of implementation of these agents to just an average person in an average country. And the fact that it's true, some countries still don't, test there too. Lontrozumab has been available for maybe not even for 15 years. Plus, it's probably the hardest part for me to stomach. And that's why I never turned down the opportunity and education opportunity to talk about gastrointestinal disease. It sounds like other patients come and find me in Canada. When the Power Translated first came out, I think, look, I chatted with you about that patient to get it in the United States because of
So for us, Bandik is all like true, but such as that inner me, in Japan, going at yet. I think the bar to finally see what care system is just slightly different. I think we also get cash and access programs, but there is a damage these last 2 years. That's realistically what happens. And I know in the US, you guys don't have to deal with that. But ever since I've gone back to Canada, I had to deal with this. I think for me, I think the cases of Mercator are getting smaller. So I think the future of how we develop this bottle, how does the patients faster is maybe these communities getting together and doing more platforms for trials or something like that. I think that would be exciting and different, right? And I think understanding the transitional stuff is what's.
Yeah, for me, doing academic research is the goal, and when I find a pharmaceutical company keen to fund academic studies, I really appreciate, but because I think that this may really and may trigger some developments, especially in early stage disease, because we know very well that the drug development starts from chemorefractory disease, pre-treated patients, and then going up to the first line, and then the life cycle of the drug is almost over, terminated, where we go to one of the most important parts, the patients will curable disease, and then you miss the opportunity to apply the use of these agents to phase 3 trials in early stage disease. So going concomitantly to academic proof of concept trials in early stage disease, it's happening because the cancer. So basically, I think this is a good opportunity for seeking signals in academic research and not missing the opportunity to inform the design of phase 3 studies. For example, the example of the Inus 585 is really important because there was no molecular selection, there was no Euroflot, several issues, and actually the matter was a positive study, change the clinical practice. But this is an example, so we should really try to collaborate with the industry because as academic researchers, the collaboration with the industry is key to really get those drugs in those patients who had curable disease, because of course we want to cure more patients in the future.
Yeah. Maybe I'll take a tiny little piece of that question and would encourage anyone to check that session out from yesterday. But there was a session on optimal hematologic superiority of various eyes and what we can learn from other tumor types. So head and neck cancer, there's been a very nice trial. The breast cancer, the woman to run all I-SPY trials, a surgeon gave a wonderful talk about using this as a framework to test surrogate endpoints. And so there's some tension between, like, the FDA just issued a statement about importance of using overall survival, which of course is ultimately the most important clinical outcome. If we can, as a field, work towards validating the surrogacy of some of the earlier readouts, we may be able to, as you suggested, get closer to the next project that you're looking at PSS and OS to see, these kinds of things add up, and eventually it ultimately is a discussion of regulators whether they accept that. But in other tumor types, there is a precedent for some of these surrogate endpoints as a tool to potentially get drugs earlier. But we don't have clean guidance, right? It's just free.
Please go in back. Or one up, Gary.
So I'm like a student interested in oncology, and I would like to ask you, when we talk about GI cancers, do you see the role of cell therapies, the treatment of gastric cancer?
Well, CAR T cell therapy, first solid tumor in gastric with the toxicity is in second line therapy. And it's certainly also out of China. It's a very, it was an exciting step forward, but the median difference in pressure threshold against standard legal line therapy, chemotherapy is very, no. So I think we want to say that CAR T's maybe for some form of, so their cell therapy will be the standard in gastric cancer. In my lifetime, as an oncologist, I think practically would have to be more off-the-shelf therapies, such as T-cell therapy or other versions of some units. First of all, in our disease rate, cancer progresses quickly, and the disease burden is eliminate. Start to rate it, make a bespoke therapy will be, and also of course the past, and then you delivering it average patient is we all you hope that what treatment that you develop and that we found out we're so far to bring into the clinic actually helps people. I was like your radius preset and that, which is really important. So in short, I think it will, but it's not the new current standard. We have to really take the car apart. I just think of something else, give you an airplane.
I'm from Mobile, and yes, it's very exciting to see all of these new molecules and these new drugs. And I know that this will there will be accelerated improved in survival patients. But I thought about financial toxicities, and I saw that there was trials that try to answer these questions. For example, breast cancer. There was the trial trying to see if in reducing the number of cycles of trastuzumab and trastuzumab, if there was any impact on the survival. What about gastric cancer or any GI?
And financial toxicity, especially in the current climate all over the world, where the hospital systems are getting bankrupt somewhere. I'll share with you one of the revelations out of this meeting is when we were going around a table discussing very complicated regimen that many investigators in the room thought are feasible because could just admit the patient and give the treatment in the hospital. Because the truth is, while being in hospitals in the United States and Japan, other Japan bankrupt because they cannot never enough patients sustain these chemotherapies and treatments are so expensive. I am very worried about the cost of research with it because the companies have to spend so much per patient on each individual patient, upwards of $30,000 for each enrolled CNA centers, that for them to recoup any of their R&D fund, they can also keep going with their development. They can't sometimes
help the charge maybe too much for the drug. AstraZeneca just recently downsized their footprint in England because it was, not financially favorable, but to them, taking up top road for of collaboration, be investigators than CRK and others. I'm worried just like you. I think there has to be better way, and I think the popular line has been in hospital at homes. We're gonna turn everything to oral therapy. Everything will be cured with a pill. That's clearly not the case. As Amalia said, and the question back in, are these treatments are getting more and more complicated, where side effect profile, if you have to have an ophthalmologist and an oncologist to get one monoclonal antibody wearing on the prescribable, it comes back to this. So I don't have a solution, unfortunately. But I keep talking about these points that you the knock is the only big come on.
I think the financial toxicities one thing, there's a group called Choosing Wisely. And you may be aware they're here as well. And also ASPA, right? It's recommended that we shouldn't be thinking about cost of drugs. I think the second part of this is toxicity. And so I think incorporating this into clinical trials, in some ways it burns because it is toxicity does it patients, right? There are certain drugs, again, they have very long chair times.
You have to be admitted and reach out as for some of it.
So to go back to the cell therapy question, and 2 cell therapy trials, we had to get trained to administer it because our hematologist could not. Gertrude and Claudin, I think there's really toxic if only a few patients could actually call the cell therapy as he owed it to. I mean, I think that is extremely extensive. It's something you aspire to for sure. I think it's going to work both solid tumors. Like it doesn't work with tumors, I'm not sure. I'm actually not very excited about aspects. I think that's going to have education. And hopefully because plus you can visualize where these blood status.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's important just from a point of view of sustainability of our therapies that financial toxicity also affect individuals because sometimes they have to travel. So they spend money to travel to bigger hospitals of different cities and they have to pay hotels, trays, place, food, everything to get access, not just to trials, but also to novel therapies. And so next this is possible in different hospitals, different regions, different causes. So this is also an individual huge problem. So I think that we should really talk about global access to novel therapies, not just from the point of view of sustainability or the national health system, because, for example, in Italy, you have free access for everyone. And this is not going to be sustainable anymore because, of course, cost of these combinations will be not sustainable soon. But also from the financial point of view of families and patients and their caregivers, of course, this is important. So when we measure quality of life, we should also measure not just what patients are getting in terms of quality of life, but also what they are losing in terms of time spent at the hospital, money to get access to these treatments, and so on. So I think that the problem is really useful, and we don't catch it in the clinical trials, actually.
Speaking of trial and quality of life, I think the evening is getting close to 9. Maybe we can close the session, and unless Sandy wants to say.
Oh, I just have a small comment to see coming from Morocco. So I have an oncologist with me for a year from Thailand, and there are some very practical things that actually can be done. So most monoclonal antibodies are initially developed on milligram per kilogram, and then we realized that most of them can be dosed spot dosing. But Thailand, for example, an average person weighs like 50 kilos, and the average American weighs like 80 kilos. And so you actually can get away with like half the dose of 1 vial Pembro versus 2 vials of Pembro. It winds up chipping away at some of these little cost things. In India, they did a study, it had neck cancer of like 1 vial versus 2 vials. no difference in outcome. So there are little pragmatic things that can be thought.
Yeah. In Italy, we had this articulated killing 10 years ago. We had just nivolumab day, where all the patients scheduled for receiving nivolumab came the same day, let's say on Monday. So you were going to say bios, putting all the patients together in the same day.
You kick up deep sea, which is quite a sense, at least what sense, right? Well, good practical tips. We'll continue the discussion after the session. Thanks for your attention, and we'll send the question.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.